side, but that's it. I got plenty of hair.
Good, we will go to you. And 5, 4, 3, 2.
What is happening, everybody, and welcome to a little bit of a different version of NFL Live Before Lock, because we've got Saturday football this week, and we're going to have some Saturday football going forward. There's Saturday playoff slate, so we're going to have you guys all covered here. If you can do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for the Stokastic NFL packages, and now is really the best time to be signing up for a couple of reasons. First off, we've got so much football coming up. We've got Saturday football, we've got Sunday football. Then you go and look at next week, and there's Wednesday football on Christmas. Then you've also got Saturday and Sunday football. So we have something like football on more than 50% of the days for the next couple of weeks. And in addition to that, we've got a promo going on right now as well, because we had a sub win $1 million last week. That was Aaron Costa, who's also been crushing it playing NBA DFS. If you guys play the DFS and you look at NBA DFS contests, especially on DraftKings, Aaron Costa's name always at the top of the leaderboards. And because he won $1 million, we've got a promo going on right now. If you sign up for our NFL Sims Max package with the promo code CELEBRATE, you're going to get more than 50% off, and that is for the remainder of the season. So usually our Sims Max package for NFL, it runs $200 per month. But with this promo, it is $179 for the remainder of the season. So you got the next about 2 months of NFL, more than 50% off of their Sims Max package. Sign up, link down below in the YouTube description box. That promo code is already loaded in, but if you want to type it in yourself, it is CELEBRATE, all capital letters. So let's start getting into it, Matt. If you guys have any questions for us as we go here, throw it into the Discord channel and at me. I'll be on the lookout for that. If you guys are in the YouTube chat and you got super chats, you can certainly throw those in as well. So a little bit different of a Live Before Lock, Matt, considering that it's a 2-game NFL slate. So I think the best way to go about doing it is we could go position by position while answering you guys' questions as we go. We'll look at DraftKings, we'll look at FanDuel, and we'll talk about our favorite players at each position, stacks, all of that kind of stuff. But let's start at quarterback and quarterback on DraftKings. And a lot of this is going to be pretty similar site to site. So a lot of it is going to cover both of them. But if we have specific differences we see, we could talk about that. But we'll start with DraftKings, the quarterbacks here, where we have one low-owned quarterback in Russell Wilson. He's pulling less than 10% ownership. There's really tiers to the ownership. Wilson, just under 10% owned. You got CJ Stroud, just under 20% owned. Then you got Patrick Mahomes. He's in the 25% owned range. And then you got the chalk at quarterback. That is Lamar Jackson, just under 50% owned. So, Matt, if you're building just one lineup out and it was a DraftKings lineup, who would be the QB you'd build around?
I think you can make rational cases for every quarterback on the slate just because, outside of Lamar Jackson, who's in a bad spot himself, the other guys don't have a ton of rushing upside themselves, and they all look pretty similar. For me, I'm going to go with CJ Stroud. I love his price tag at $6K. I know he's had an underwhelming year, but we've seen plenty of upside from him in the past. And again, it's only a 2-game slate. If Lamar Jackson doesn't get there, which he hasn't gotten there a bunch of times against Pittsburgh, then I don't think you're going to need a massive upside score from your quarterback. Kansas City's defense is very good. I don't think any of the quarterbacks in this slate or on this slate are in a perfect spot by any means. For me, I'm going to say it's CJ Stroud. The Sims would tell me I'm getting the most leverage on Russell Wilson, but I'm still getting more Stroud than Wilson. How about you?
Yeah, Wilson's kind of interesting just from a standpoint of how low owned he's going to be, especially in single entry. If you were just to build, one lineup and say single entry, we've got Russell Wilson only about 10% on large field tournaments. What is he going to be? Maybe 5% owned in single entry. So that's the reason I lean towards Russell Wilson here, is just because it's a 2-game slate. There's a lot of randomness involved in some of these slates. I just think he's going to be so low owned. And then on top of it too, with George Pickens out of the mix for Pittsburgh, you've got really, really cheap stacking options that you could go with for Russell Wilson, who are also not going to be all that popular. You could go Russell Wilson with, say, Calvin Austin and Pat Freiermuth. These are 3 players I'm all overweight to the field to. You get a double stack there, and then you could kind of pay up for wherever you want on the rest of the lineup spots. And you could go really chalky at running back with a Russell Wilson lineup as well. And you wouldn't have to be all that worried about it being duped or anything like that, just because of how low owned Russell Wilson and the Steelers are. So Russell Wilson, that's who I'm most inclined to go with for a single entry lineup. And it's mostly due to ownership.
Yeah, that makes sense. There just isn't a lot separating these guys, again, outside of Lamar, who's in a tough spot. So I'm with it, just playing the ownership there.
Yeah. So for me, it is going to be Russell Wilson. And by the way, also, if I look at the lineups that I've built out, I'm overweight to the field on Wilson, Stroud, and Mahomes, and just coming in underweight to the field on Lamar Jackson, even though Jackson is my most rostered quarterback. He's so much more popular than all the other guys that I do come in underweight to the field to him by a decent amount, him being in a third of my lineups. And, it's just what happens on a 2-game slate. I've got one quarterback in 33% of lineups, and that means that I end up being massively underweight to the field here on Lamar Jackson. I obviously don't have an issue with him considering he's in a third of my lineups. I'm just underweight relative to the ownership of the field. If you had to pick one of these quarterbacks on DraftKings to be underweight to, and we'll talk about FanDuel next, would it be Lamar Jackson or would it be somebody else?
I think it's got to be Lamar Jackson just because he's getting so much ownership. And again, like I kind of like to take a 30,000 foot view on this. Sure, Lamar is the best DFS quarterback on this slate. He's the best DFS quarterback on most slates he's on outside of, Josh Allen, potentially Jalen Hurts sometimes. But if this game were on a main slate, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, Lamar Jackson would not be very highly owned because Pittsburgh's defense is very good and they've done a good job containing him. One of his lowest scores of the season was against Pittsburgh earlier in the season. Doesn't mean that he's not going to play well here, but I think he's the obvious guy to get underweight on in tournaments.
Yeah, and it's just because of how crazy popular it is. It's not because of any particular issues that I have with Lamar Jackson. It's just the interest of trying to get some lineups to look a little bit different than the field. And now if we go ahead and look over at the FanDuel side of things, it's more or less the same sort of scenario. You got Lamar Jackson 45% on, Mahomes 25%, Stroud just under 20%, Russell Wilson right around 10%. So as far as the ownership goes, Matt, it's pretty much the same over on FanDuel. Here's what's different, though, and what ends up making my lineups look different on FanDuel. The salaries are much closer together. So Russell Wilson is $7,400. Lamar Jackson is $8,800. So on FanDuel, I have myself overweight to the field on Lamar Jackson and then in turn underweight to the other three quarterbacks. And part of that, too, the rushing upside matters a little bit more on the FanDuel side of things. So even though the quarterback ownership is the same on two sites, my exposures look pretty drastically different across the two. Lamar Jackson showing up in more than half of my FanDuel lineup. So if I was just building one FanDuel lineup, Matt, I would go with Lamar Jackson at quarterback and I differentiate elsewhere. Who would be your single entry quarterback on FanDuel? Would it be different the way you went with on DraftKings, or how would you approach it?
I think that makes more sense just because the pricing is more compact. I still like Stroud here. And again, it's more of a gut play than anything else. I do think that his ownership is going to be more similar to Russell Wilson's than it will be Lamar Jackson's. Obviously, it'll be in between there, but he's not going to get much love at all. And again, kind of playing the ownership game there. I view it pretty similar as I do DraftKings, except that you're right. Like the pricing is more condensed, so there isn't as big of a reason to get away from Lamar.
All right, so let's go ahead. Anything else you want to add about the quarterbacks? If not, we'll look at the running backs.
I don't think so. Just that, like, again, like presuming Lamar like doesn't hit upside here, I don't think you're going to need a massive score from your quarterback. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, could certainly be the case. I mean, we see it all the time on main slates, like not to get too far ahead of ourselves for tomorrow, but I've started to build out some lineups just from content I've done over the course of the week. And I've like Michael Penix is going to be one of my most rostered quarterbacks and some of the other cheaper guys as well. So yeah, unless you get one of those slates like Josh Allen in a couple of recent weeks where he goes out and scores a bazillion fantasy points, quarterback, it is very, very important for real life football, but usually not quite as much for DFS purposes. So let's talk about running backs now. And here's the chalk at running back, Matt. We'll start once again on the DraftKings side of things. We've got 60% ownership to Derrick Henry. We've got 64% ownership going to Joe Mixon. If you could roster just one of the chalk running backs, do you have a preference between Mixon and Henry?
I'm going to say Henry just because of how I'm playing quarterback. Like, again, I like Stroud, with ownership considered more than Lamar. So, yeah, I wish Henry wasn't getting as much love as he is, but it makes sense just because, him and Mixon are the clear two top guys. And because I don't mind being underweight on Lamar, give me Henry here. How about you?
It's got to be Joe Mixon for me. I've just very sparingly played Derrick Henry this season, and we'll talk about FanDuel where things can be a little bit different, but at least for DraftKings purposes, Henry, especially lately, has been so expensive with just about no receiving upside, and it makes it really, really difficult for me to click on that button. Because if you look at Derrick Henry overall for the season, unless he is scoring touchdowns, which I know he's done it a good amount this year, there just isn't any real realistic upside to him. He has one game with multiple receptions since September 29th. So you're generally looking at a guy, and also 3 out of the last 4 games, 0 receptions on 0 targets. He did have the game against the Eagles where the Ravens were trailing and they did end up targeting him 3 times, but that was only the second time that's happened the entire season. So for Derrick Henry at this price point to really have an upside, you are typically going to need over 100 rushing yards and probably 2 rushing touchdowns as well without the receiving bonus. Because if you look at Henry and let's say he goes for 100 yards and a touchdown, that's going to be like 19 fantasy points, which isn't terrible, but more likely than not, it's not a score you're going to be thrilled with relative to his price tag. And it's just really hard to expect that, especially in a matchup against the Steelers, who are a team with a really stout run defense. Like we saw them shut down Saquon Barkley not all that long ago either. And then also you look at some of these recent games for Henry. I don't know if he's wearing down as the season's gone on or something else, but great matchup against the Giants last week. He was really popular. 14 carries for 67 yards and a blowout win. Perfect game script for him. For that against the Eagles, 19 carries for 82 yards. He had the game against the Chargers where he had 24 carries for 140 yards. But once again, no receiving upside for him. So he got 17 fantasy points. It's really not a great outcome. It's just hard for me to realistically see this outcome where a ceiling outcome for Derrick Henry, unless you're going to be getting well over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. And it's just not super, super likely. I'm going to pull up some of his props here. I don't know if you've looked at it, but what would you guess is the rushing prop for Derrick Henry today?
85.
Let's see. Derrick Henry, it is 83.5.
Okay, that was right on, and I have not looked at it once.
Yeah.
I'll counter you with this because all your points are valid. And on a main slate, again, I would have no interest in playing Henry here. My counter to you would be like, what running backs do you feel confident that you're going to play that are going to score more than Henry? Now, again, I understand that Henry's the most expensive. I'm not sure salary matters that much on this slate. So I think your points are totally valid. I just don't know if you need that upside today.
Could be. Yeah. I mean, if none of these running backs have good games, but I mean, Joe Mixon, we've got projected for about a fantasy point and a half more than Derrick Henry. So he's cheaper. The ownership's about the same between the two of them. It's also a matchup against Kansas City where we could see Joe Mixon get some pass game involvement as well if the Texans are to be trailing, because that is something that we've seen a good amount of from Joe Mixon, especially as of late. He has 6 targets exactly in 3 consecutive games. 2 games before that, he had 4 targets. So in general, out of Joe Mixon, you could count on him having comparable rushing upside to Derrick Henry while also getting involvement in the passing game. So that's really why I lean towards Joe Mixon. And now I'll look, what would you guess Joe Mixon's rushing prop is?
I'm going to say 76.
All right. Rushing prop for Joe Mixon, 62.5. But his receiving yard prop is 22.5. So overall, you're looking at very, very similar expected total yardages for Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, his over-under for receptions prop is 0.5. His yardage prop also 0.5 there. So no real expected workload in the passing game for him once again. So you got guys between Mixon and Henry, both with really similar expected outcomes in terms of total yardage, but Mixon's comes with receiving yard expectations that doesn't come with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say to that, like, I don't know what the touchdown props are, but I would presume that Henry has a little bit of better odds to score a touchdown. And the other thing I'll say, and I'm with you, like I played Henry last week. He was very disappointing. He was in a great spot. It seemed to me like they really limited him in the second half, knowing they had an early game this week. That game was never in too much doubt, and he didn't play a ton. Again, only 14 carries. He's not in a great spot here. I'm not going to be surprised if Pittsburgh does to him what they did to Saquon. I just think for me, it's not even about him over Mixon. It's about him and Mixon are so much better than everyone else to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly no reason I think you can't play Derrick Henry just between the two. I'm leaning towards Joe Mixon in more of my lineups. Some super chats that came in. One here from Brandon Wagner wants to know, how much salary are we okay leaving on the table? Look at some of my top lineups. I have, so of my top 10 sim ROI lineups, the most salary any of them leaves on the table, Matt, is $1,300.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind like if the Sims give you stuff that are, 1,000, 1,500. I don't really think you want to go more than that if you're hand building. You know, I don't think you have to spend the full salary cap, but I wouldn't be going out of my way not to. There's enough good players on this slate.
Yeah, I'm looking through my lineups, and that seems to be, of my top lineups, the most salary I could find left on the table is $1,500. So that's what I'll say I'm comfortable with. For a single entry lineup, it probably wouldn't be quite that much. It would probably be something like $500-$600 the most that I'd be willing to leave on the table. But yeah, certainly for a 2-game slate, it's one reasonable way to differentiate. I actually think it matters a little bit more on FanDuel leaving salary on the table, just because you do see a little bit more overlap just because the pricing is so soft over on FanDuel. But I know it's a DraftKings related question. And then Chris Williams says, the drill, just atoning. And with so much money up for grabs, I suggest others do the same. And then Chris Williams gifted out 10 YouTube memberships. So as always, Chris, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Let's talk about some of the cheaper running backs now, Matt. And we talked about the expensive chalk options in Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry. Nobody else is crazy popular, which makes sense. If you got two running backs who are north of 60% owned, it's not like there's space for more running backs to be north of 50% owned. But in the 30% range, we got Najee Harris, we got Jalen Warren, we got Isaiah Pacheco. If you're looking to go cheaper at running back and not play a Mixon or Henry, who is the lower cost running back that you find yourself gravitating towards?
I don't love any of them. And I like Henry and Mixon so much more than the rest that's kind of what I was trying to say before. But my answer there would be Jalen Warren. I think Pittsburgh is likely to be trailing in this game. And he's, their pass catching back. I think he's got PPR upside. He's the cheapest of the bunch. So give me Warren to answer that question. That said, I don't think there's a clear separator between all these guys.
I'm going to lean towards Najee Harris. I don't have an issue with Jalen Warren either. I think both of them are strong options. And normally I wouldn't love playing them together, and not saying that's my preference for today, but considering it's only a 2-game slate, I think if you do play them together, it's a reasonable way to differentiate. There is workload available to both of them. And then also no George Pickens today for the Steelers. Maybe that means that there's a little bit of extra target share available for both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren to get an extra target or two a piece there. So I like both Harris and Warren. I also see that we've got a question in Discord from Einsteinium asking Justice Hill, Jalen Warren. Do we like any of these guys? I prefer Jalen Warren between the two of Warren and Justice Hill. Hill only $4,800, especially if you're building a lineup for a game script that the Steelers win. And I don't want to make this seem like I'm shitting on Derrick Henry, but if the Steelers were to be ahead, Derrick Henry doesn't get those passing game routes that Justice Hill does when the Ravens are trailing. So if you are building a lineup that's stacking the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think Justice Hill makes sense as a run back just because Derrick Henry probably isn't going to be on the field a ton in that kind of situation. But I prefer Jalen Warren to Justice Hill. Yourself?
Yeah, but I think all your points are valid. Like there's certainly scripts here where Hill is, like to your point, better than Henry. So yeah, I like Warren more than Hill, but they each have a place on this slate.
All right, let's see what it is that we have for additional questions. We've answered all of the super chats, and nothing else in Discord. Are there any crazy contrarian running backs they're considering getting to?
I don't think so. I think if I want to get weird, it's more on the receivers. I don't think there's really a place for any crazy running backs. How about you?
Yeah, not really for me. I'm with you. If I'm going to go a little bit off the board, it's more so at the wide receiver position than the running back position. It's really hard to make a case for like a Kareem Hunt or something like that with Isaiah Pacheco back. So it's going to be more so the popular running backs for me. Najee Harris, the one that, at least relative to ownership, I'm most overweight to the field on. But he's still owned in the 20% range. So it's not like he's crazy contrarian or anything like that. On the FanDuel side of things, Matt, we do have Derrick Henry at 65% ownership. We have Joe Mixon at 62% ownership. And here's where my opinion differs between DraftKings and FanDuel. On DraftKings, I prefer Joe Mixon. On FanDuel, though, I prefer Derrick Henry, where the price tag, $9K on Henry, $8,600 on Mixon. So you have a $400 price gap. But Derrick Henry, where we talked about before, he's got a little bit more run game equity. Joe Mixon has a little bit more pass game equity, a little bit more touchdown equity on Derrick Henry. The pass game value doesn't matter quite as much on the FanDuel side of things, where it's 0.5 PPR. So I prefer Derrick Henry on FanDuel to Joe Mixon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then as far as the cheaper guys, Jalen Warren, Isaiah Pacheco, Najee Harris, anybody on the FanDuel side of things that you have a preference to go to if you're going to be looking at one of the cheaper running backs who isn't Henry or Mixon. And then once again, Henry, $9K on FanDuel, Mixon, $8,600. Maybe a little bit more difficult over there to fit both of them into as many lineups.
Yeah, I don't like Warren as much because of the PPR. Doesn't mean as much on FanDuel, but I don't love Najee Harris either. But, maybe I like Harris more on FanDuel than I do on DK.
Isaiah Pacheco at 6K on FanDuel. It's a pretty cheap price tag. I don't
That's
know,
real cheap.
I don't know exactly that we could count on him for a full workload today, considering he's still kind of working his way back from the fractured fibula, fractured tibia that he had earlier in the season. But 13 carries last week, 14 carries the week before when he had 7 in his first game back. I don't know, maybe this is when we start to see him get back to 15 plus carries. And while the workload is down a little bit from the start of the season, it's not so discounted that he should be 6K. This is a guy who's regularly like a 7 to 8K running back. So I think this is a pretty good buy low spot for Isaiah Pacheco because he's certainly going to be more expensive come playoff time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's a little bit hard to get fully on board with Pacheco with Kareem Hunt there, like looming, and they haven't really, at least to this point, wanted to give Pacheco like more of a workload or, the full workload. But I do think that's coming. Like he is much better than Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt is who he is. If you need, 2 yards on 4th and 3, on 4th and 1, he'll get you 3 yards. If you need 5 yards on 4th and 4, he'll get you 3 yards. That's just who he is.
Yeah. And kind of interesting here. Rosso Music brought this up. This is true. I want to ask you if this is any relevance to today's slate for you. But all these teams play on Christmas. I assume this was done intentionally, but
it was.
Yeah, we've got all of these exact same teams playing on Christmas. Matchups are different. So you've got Chiefs, Steelers, and Ravens, Texans for Christmas Day next week. Do you think that impacts any of the workload that we're going to see from these players? Because we're looking at back-to-back short weeks for all of these teams.
Yeah, this was planned. I know that this is like 3 games in 11 days or something, which is crazy. I don't know. We have never seen this before. There's never been Wednesday games. So I'm not sure. Wouldn't be shocked, but also like at least this week, these teams all need wins. If Pittsburgh wins this game, they wrap up the AFC North. If Baltimore wins it, it's like wide open. And same with Kansas City. They need to win to lock up the home field in the AFC. So I'm not overly worried about it, but I don't think it's crazy to think about it that way.
Yeah, I do wonder if maybe it just made me think that perhaps I'm overvaluing the potential for there to be bigger workload for Pacheco, considering coming back from the injury and it was a stress fracture. So maybe I should roll back my exposure there a little bit. But astute point brought up by Rosso Music there in the chat. And then for FanDuel purposes as well, same for me on DraftKings. I don't really see any way off the board cheap running backs that I want to be getting to. I get some exposure to Justice Hill over on DraftKings, but he's $4,800 on DraftKings. He's $5,600 over on FanDuel. The PPR bonus also matters less. So Justice Hill, he's more expensive than Jalen Warren. He's more expensive than Kareem Hunt. He's only $1,000 cheaper than Najee Harris. I get to some of Justice Hill on DraftKings. He's hard for me to justify on the FanDuel side of things.
Yeah, agreed.
Anything else you want to add about the running backs?
I don't think so.
All right, let's go ahead and start talking about the wide receivers then. And wide receiver, we'll go back over to the DraftKings side of things. So move my lineups from FanDuel to DraftKings. And now wide receivers, Matt, I'm curious to ask you this as well. If you could only pay up for one player on the slate, would it be Nico Collins or would it be one of the running backs? If you had to choose one out of all three of those guys.
Can you repeat that question for me?
Yeah. If you could only pay up for one guy, we'll call it a flex spot, and it could be Nico Collins or run at one of the running backs, would you prefer to spend up at wide receiver or running back?
Definitely Nico Collins, 100%. Not even a question for me. How about you?
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. There's a crazy price gap today. The most expensive wide receiver, the aforementioned Nico Collins, is $8,100. We don't have a single wide receiver that's more than 6K on DraftKings outside of Collins. This massive price gap really drives me to a lot of Collins exposure, and I don't see another way around it just because of the fact that if you're going to pay up for wide receiver, he's literally the only option.
Yeah, I mean, I built out a couple lines, and in like all the top ROI lines in the Sims, I'm getting like 100% Nico Collins.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. I don't have quite 100%, but I've got a ton of him. I've got more of him than I do to either of the top end running backs right now. So Nico Collins, especially because you said you like CJ Stroud a good amount, that totally makes sense. I think Nico Collins is the best overall play on the slate. Not that I'm making any kind of crazy stand. He's projected for 75% ownership. I just don't know how you get away from him when he's on an island in terms of his price tag there at wide receiver. So Nico Collins certainly looks really good. And we got a super chat here from Goody. And he says, suddenly KC is a receiving core. What are we doing with Hollywood Brown for DK20 max for the 2-game slate? I am hardly getting to any of Hollywood Brown. He is in 2% of my top 150 lineups. I know he's really cheap, but I mean, very, very cheap. Flatman price at a 3K on DraftKings. It's hard for me to imagine he's going to play a massive role right out of the gate, though.
Yeah, I agree. Like, he's only 3K. When I was hand building a little bit, he popped out, and it's Hollywood Brown at 3K price tag. But the Sims don't like him. One of the top props I saw earlier was under 1 catch for or under 1.5 catches for Hollywood Brown. Whenever I see stuff like that, it makes me leery, especially because I think he might get a little bit more ownership than he should because of his name. So I never hate a 3K guy. They're rarely going to kill you, but I'm not going to go out of my way to get it.
Yeah, I'll if you needed to roster wide receiver at the flat min 3K, he's the best option, but that's not really saying much. And it's not that necessary either, because there are actually guys who are a little bit more expensive than 3K that I do like quite a bit, particularly because of George Pickens being out for Pittsburgh. So could you go to Hollywood Brown? Yeah, it's not the end of the world. And even a 0 from a 3K guy, like Matt said, it's very rarely going to kill you. But I have other wide receivers I like to punt with. I'm curious, Matt, do you have a favorite punt option of wide receiver? We'll talk about any of the guys sub 4K.
I mean, this is like just off, like there's no method to this madness, but he's 3K also. And I don't think anyone's going to play him because they're playing Hollywood Brown. Give me Devontae Walker. Again, caught a touchdown last week for his first NFL catch. And Baltimore's receiving core, again, not like Deontay Johnson was playing, but Nelson Aguilar is sitting today. So there's some room here. And we know Lamar will spread it out. Bateman's also questionable. I don't know if news on him has come out, but give me Devontae Walker. And then also, because I said Walker, also Tylan Wallace as well.
Yeah, so the latest on Rashad Bateman is that the injury does not look serious, but he is still questionable, and it's still up in the air whether he's going to end up playing or not, which does open up some interesting possibilities. Like late swap rarely comes into play for NFL, but I think it's going to potentially for this slate, Matt. You got Rashad Bateman at $4,900, who I do have exposure to, but we don't know if he's going to be playing or not. So I'm certainly prepared to make late swaps to my lineup should we find out that he's ruled out. But as of right now, we don't have official word.
Yeah, I always presume these guys are going to play in the NFL, but we don't know.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see. I see that we got the message in chat. Sarah Anderson says he was in a boot 2 days ago, and Sarah talking about Rashad Bateman. Yeah, but questionable. I do think his ownership is going to end up being lower than projected because of this injury heading into lock, right?
Oh, hell yeah. Especially because like he's not at a price point that like Like this is kind of a stars and scrubsy slate just because there's a clear pecking order. And I don't think Bateman's going to fit in that build at all. And you throw in that he's questionable. He's going to be way lower owned than he should be if he plays. I'm totally with you.
Yeah, so that's something else I did too when I was building out my lineups in the contest generator. And this is not something I do all that frequently, but I felt it was necessary for this slate. Is I did lower the projected ownership on Rashad Bateman when I was building the lineups out in the contest generator, just because I felt like that was going to be a little bit more accurate. Now, I will give my answer for my favorite sub 4K wide receiver, Calvin Austin. I think he's in line for a pretty big workload in the absence of George Pickens. Obviously, Calvin Austin is not George Pickens, but of all the wide receivers on the team, he's the one who's most able to replicate his downfield skill set. So I think Calvin Austin, very underpriced at $3,800. I'm surprised that he's not mega chalk today. I thought he'd be super popular. He's barely over 20% on the absence of Pickens. So if I'm going to save salary at wide receiver, Matt, Austin's the guy I want to be going to.
I get it. He hasn't been great though, and Pickens has been out. So like I'm not that surprised that he's not getting a ton of love. I will say though, the Sims love him, and I'm also getting over the field on him. But I don't feel great about it. I don't feel as good as you do about it, I should say.
Yeah, he's in about half my lineups at $3,800. So definitely someone I'm taking a little bit of a stand on. Part of that too is me being overweight to the field on Russell Wilson. 5K wide receivers, Matt. We got Zay Flowers, DeAndre Hopkins, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy. There's really tiers to the wide receivers. You got Nico Collins in a tier of his own. You got the cheap guys we just went through. And then I guess we could add Bateman to this as well, because from 5,900 to 4,900, these are the group of guys in this salary range. Who is your favorite option to be getting to?
I like Stroud, so give me Tank Dell. Again, maybe Hopkins if I wasn't including the quarterback, but give me Tank Dell.
It's going to be Zay Flowers for me. A big part of it on DraftKings also is that I don't have very much exposure to Derrick Henry. And in the intro, and I'm also underweight to the field on Lamar Jackson. So at some point, I have to find where I'm getting exposure to the Baltimore Ravens, especially on a 2-game slate with 4 pretty quality teams. It's hard to just outright be avoiding one of those teams, especially when it's the Ravens, one of the best offenses in the league, and probably the best offense overall in the slate as well. So the way I'm primarily getting exposure to the Ravens today, Matt, it's going to be through Zay Flowers. So I'm hoping for a big Zay Flowers game. I feel like he's always underpriced on DraftKings for his upside, because there are a lot of games where the Ravens just don't have to throw the football all that much. And you see some of these spots where it's like, hey, Lamar Jackson had 14 pass attempts and the Ravens won by 30 points. In the games that are competitive, though, Zay Flowers is pretty clearly the number one guy in the passing game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a great way to get Baltimore exposure. My biggest, like, even though I totally think, and he's clearly the number one guy in Baltimore, Lamar just spreads it around. So that's like the only knock on Flowers. But Flowers himself, I think he's too cheap on DraftKings. So I'm with you. He looks like one of the better plays overall.
Got a super chat here from Chris Williams. Says, great show like always, guys. He says he's running about 200 lineups, and the majority of them seem to be leaving a ton of money on the table. Is that viable for today? So yes, you could certainly leave money on the table, but he says most of his lineups are leaving $900 to $1,400. If you're building 200 lineups and almost all of them are leaving upwards of $1,000 in salary on the table, I think you're making a mistake somewhere.
Yeah, I do too. Just because projections are still going to like lean towards spending most of your cap for a lot of lineups. So totally with you.
Eric Johnson wants to know, is Worthy chalk? Yes, he is very, very chalky. He is the 3rd most popular wide receiver on the slate. Nico Collins 1, Zay Flowers 2. Worthy is the 3rd most popular wide receiver. He's quite popular. Anything else you want to add at the wide receiver position for DraftKings, Matt? If not, we'll go over to FanDuel.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to ask you, like the guys I mentioned, like Devontae Walker and Tylan Wallace, what do you think like happens to them in the Sims if Bateman's out?
Ooh, yeah, if Bateman's out, then they start to show up in lineups. They start to become guys that would look better than, not better than, say, like Calvin Austin, at least in our data, but they definitely show up ahead of, say, like Van Jefferson, ahead of Mike Williams, ahead of those kinds of guys.
I think it's a situation where, like, piggybacking off what you said earlier, I think either Bateman is going to be too low owned if he's in, or the other guys aren't going to get enough love if he's out. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's how I see it.
See if there was any other questions that came into Discord. Nothing at the moment. So let's go over to the wide receivers on FanDuel. And yeah, this is going to be, at least for me, pretty similar in terms of what I like on FanDuel relative to what I'm liking on DraftKings, Matt. I like Nico Collins' spend up option. Same deal. If you're paying up for wide receiver, he's 9K. Nobody's remotely close to him. I'm well overweight to the field on Zay Flowers as well on FanDuel. And then if I go ahead and I look at some of the players that I'm getting exposure to in the mid-range, Calvin Austin at $5,500, Rashad Bateman at $6,300. My exposures more or less look identical on FanDuel wide receiver to they do on DraftKings. Is there anything that really stands out to you as being different across FanDuel and DK as far as wideouts are concerned?
No. I think I like Flowers maybe a little bit more on FanDuel just because like he's a guy that doesn't need a ton of catches to get there, but that's semantics and kind of, trying to find a needle in a haystack. So not really, no.
All right. Yeah, that's how I feel as well. I mean, I go back and forth. There's like a couple percentage point difference across the lineups, but in general, it's like Rashad Bateman. He's in mid 20% of my lineups. I've got Zay Flowers and Nico Collins as the priorities. Calvin Austin, the value option I get the most of on FanDuel. So it's really similar across the two sites for me at a wide receiver. So let's look at tight end next. And if you guys haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, for the holidays, not only do we currently have the deal on the Stokastic Sims tools, but also Portfolio EV. That is on sale for 50% off. If you guys follow me on Twitter and you've seen the bankroll threads that I've been doing, I've been trying to do content to show people that betting really can be for anybody. There are some people who say that you need to have the thousands of dollars in a bankroll saved up before you can go ahead and start betting, but I really don't think that's the case. And that's why I went ahead and I started just putting together these threads where I started the NBA season with $100 of a bankroll and just using the tools right at OddShopper, none of my own personal input, just following the tools and the bet size recommendations. That $100 after I think it's been 47 slates now or something like that is now over $700, Matt. So these are tools that pay for themselves. And for you guys to get access to them, you can sign up, link down below in the YouTube description box. Promo code GIFTEV is going to get you 50% off your first month. And if you are somebody who wants to be serious about betting, this is, number one, not all that expensive. You're talking about a $50 per month, $50 for the first month for the sub. And then in addition to that, it couldn't be easier. It's going to tell you exactly what to bet as well as how much to bet, which book you should be betting at, where the best lines are. So go check out Portfolio EV. I think that it is probably the best tool that we have on the site as far as making you as much money as possible. Let's look at tight ends now, Matt. And for tight end on DraftKings, let's see what I have for my exposures. All right. First, this. How do you feel about double tight end lineups for this slate?
I was just about to say that. I like them quite a bit. The Sims are really pumping them out. And I think tight end might be the deepest position on the slate. Doesn't have the upside that the receivers or running backs do, but there's 5 tight ends I think look really solid here.
I have about half of my lineups are double tight end lineups. I'm just kind of adding up the exposures that I have in my head. And overall, I have about 150% exposure to the tight end position, which means about half of my lineups are having 2 tight ends in them. So I think that's a pretty reasonable build to save you guys some salary today. The tight ends too. I mean, Kelsey's $5,600 on DraftKings, got Andrews at $4,300. Everybody else is sub 4K. Do you have a favorite tight end to be getting to? Because I'm overweight to a lot of these guys considering the amount of double tight end lineups that I'm going to.
I am as well. My favorite's going to be Dalton Schultz, though. I like him the most. I'm getting the most to him in the Sims. I like CJ Stroud a lot. He's an easy weapon to pair. So Dalton Schultz. And then probably second is Freiermuth.
I am overweight to Kelsey. I'm overweight to Schultz. I'm overweight to Andrews. And I'm overweight to Freiermuth. Those are the 4 guys who I find myself gravitating towards the most. So it's going to be really annoying if it's like an Isaiah Likely or Noah Gray Day or something like that. But you got Kelsey right around 40% owned. Then you got Freiermuth, Andrews, and Schultz, all just over 20% owned. And I mean, those marks, especially if you're playing double tight end lineups, it's pretty easy to be overweight to all of these guys. So overall, I have the most exposure to Travis Kelce. And maybe some workload concerns. You got Pacheco back in the mix. You got Hollywood Brown making his debut. but he's so priced down, Travis Kelce at $5,600, that I'm totally good with going to him. And then if I'm going to be going really cheap, Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth both stand out to me a ton. I've got nearly identical ownership to the both of them. I love the tight end position today. I think that this is probably a better slate for tight ends with just 2 games than we saw in some like 10-game slates earlier in the season.
Totally with you. The one guy I'm not getting much of at all, and I'm scared, is Mark Andrews. He's looked good recently. I'm just getting a lot of Schultz, Kelce, and Freiermuth, so I'm not getting a ton of anyone else. Yeah.
All right, let's look at the FanDuel side of things. And then afterwards, if you guys have any questions, we'll answer those. If you don't have additional questions, Matt and I built some lineups in the single lineup sims to bring us home after we look at the rest of the tight ends here. Tight ends over on FanDuel. Anything that stand out to you as being massively different on FanDuel? Kelce is 6,500, Andrews is 6K. So the price gap between the top and the bottom tight ends, it's not quite as significant on FanDuel. I mean, for instance, Travis Kelce is $6,500. Noah Gray is $5,400. I know there's people who have liked playing Noah Gray as of late. It's kind of hard for me to justify Noah Gray over Travis Kelce when there's only $1,100 in salary differing between them, though.
Yeah, agreed. I think that would strictly just be an ownership play, but man, the prices are too close for me to even want to get there. No, again, kind of like a quarterback, the pricing is more condensed. So probably makes me like Kelce more just because, you're not really getting much of a discount. I still like Schultz because I like Stroud, but I think Kelce would have to be my favorite on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's Kelce for me on FanDuel. I mean, it's Kelce for me out in DraftKings as well. Do you have a second favorite tight end on FanDuel? Is it the same as what you're liking on DraftKings or maybe a different guy?
Ownership is very like the price tag's condensed. I'm gonna go Dalton Schultz just because he's cheaper than Likely. He's cheaper than Noah Gray. Like he's the cheapest out of the viable ones. And I think there are certainly paths where he's the highest scorer. So Schultz here for me.
All right. Anything else you want to add? If not, we could build some lineups in the single lineup sims.
I don't think so. Do you have any strong like defense takes? I don't. I was just curious.
No, I just hate defense. I would like it to go away. It's actually,
you know how it's bad when like a lot of times it's just crazy. I could go into so many things why it's bad. It's just awful.
I look at my exposures to defense for starting on FanDuel. I'm not more than 5% off on any 4 of these defenses in the field on FanDuel, on DraftKings. Let's see if I have any real kind of stand at defense. No, I don't, which I am absolutely totally cool with. I don't want defenses to make or break me. I don't want to be heavily invested in one defense. I don't want to be fading any one defense. I more or less just want to have, what does the field have? Cool. Just give me that with the defenses. And then hopefully they all score about the same fantasy points. They don't determine the slate.
With you.
So let's see if there were any final questions that came in. If not, oh, here we do have a couple of questions. So we'll answer these. And then Mike, pull up the single lineup sims. And one thing I think that could be fun, Matt and I will build we'll go back and forth. We'll build the lineup on DraftKings and FanDuel, and we'll try to differ them up a little bit as well. But let's see. A couple of questions here. First, one is from Omega 2K1. He says, for the FanDuel wide receiver spot, Dell or Austin for flex. Okay, so Dell or Austin for wide receiver, and then Harris or Worthy in the flex. Okay. I get, for FanDuel purposes, and so we're talking here, I guess salary isn't really an option, isn't really a concern. We're just doing 1v1s. So if there are no salary considerations here, I prefer Tank Dell to Calvin Austin if the $500 in salary savings doesn't mean anything to you.
Same. It's close though.
And then in the flex, I like Harris over Worthy.
Definitely on FanDuel. I mean, well, maybe it's closer than I'm giving it credence for, but I still think it's Harris.
Yeah. I mean, we've got Harris projected for a couple more fantasy points, and you're still getting pretty decent ownership as well on Worthy on both sides. So yeah, Harris for me. And then Einstein wants to know, if Bateman is out, would that also be a bump to Likely? Maybe a little, not significant. The guys who really benefit the most, it's the down the depth chart pass catching options for the Ravens, like Wallace, for instance.
I agree, but I also think it just helps everyone because you're taking a body out. It helps Flowers. It helps the tight ends. We don't know exactly who it's going to help the most is how I actually see it.
We know it doesn't help Deontay Johnson because he's not on the team anymore.
Facts.
That went poorly. That went poorly there. Yeah, Eric T in the chat says Tylan Wallace gets the biggest bump. Yeah, I tend to think that that's the case, but not necessarily, guaranteed or anything. All right. Want to build some lineups then, Matt?
Would love to.
All right. Mike, pull up the single lineup sims, and we'll start with DraftKings. And then we'll build a FanDuel lineup, and we'll probably have time to go back and forth a little bit here. But starting with DraftKings, Matt, I'll let you choose first. Who do you want to plug in at quarterback?
Let's go Russell Wilson.
Okay, we'll go really contrarian. So let's see if we could build a good-looking Russell Wilson stack here. Now, with it only being a 2-game slate, what's your preference? Do you like making a single stack, double stack, or triple stack? What's the overall most frequent build you like to go to?
Probably double stack with a quarterback like Wilson that doesn't run a lot. So my favorite 2 Pittsburgh plays, which I would, if I were making one lineup with Russell Wilson, and I think you're going to be right in line here, is going to be Calvin Austin and Freiermuth.
Let's do it. Let's go Austin and Freiermuth then. And that's going to give us a pretty good amount of salary to play with here because Austin's $3,800. We got Freiermuth only being $3,900. All right. So at running back now, I guess we just pay up. We could go if I do prefer Jaylen Warren with Russell Wilson if we're going to stack one of these guys. And I don't hate that as a possibility here, but want to try a Mixon and Henry to see if that works for salary.
Yeah, although I keep thinking about what you said like a while ago in this show. If you're building Pittsburgh stacks like that, you might want but you don't need the salary. So like it's a conundrum because Henry could easily like get there on a long run early. But if he doesn't and Pittsburgh gets up in this game, you got real problems with Henry. I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could also think of this game script from a standpoint. Maybe the Ravens are up a bunch, and then you're just getting like prevent defense where the price points on Calvin Austin and Freiermuth. If they each put up 10 fantasy points, you're probably feeling pretty good about it.
True. And it's impossible. Like you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. It's impossible to know exactly how a football game is going to play out. So I do think because we're spending down at like 3 positions, plugging in Mixon and Henry is probably the best way to go.
All right. So let's go Mixon and Henry. And now let's go to a defense here, just because now we know that we are going to have to be saving some salary at, all those defenses are around the same price point, but just give us the most flexibility. I guess Chiefs, we're plugging the Chiefs at 2,700.
I think so, yeah.
We probably don't want to go to the Steelers defense for cheap. Ravens defense, don't want to go to them at $3,300, especially now we're building a Steelers stacks. Then it's Texans or Chiefs. I prefer the Chiefs because they're cheaper.
That's what I was going to say about defenses earlier. Like your first thought is we don't want to play a Ravens D, but like that's like almost when you get the nuts is when Wilson throws a pick 6 or 2. It's the worst. That's why defenses are the worst. Like that Denver Browns Monday night game.
All right, 6K. Can we go Nico Collins? I'm just curious. We plug Nico Collins in. What does that do for remaining salary?
You'll have 5,000 per for flex on a wide receiver. Okay.
All right, so it's still pretty easily doable. So let's go to another option in the. We could plug in Mark Andrews at 4,300 in the flex. That might actually I think that's going to give us too much salary because there's nobody at wide receiver that is at that price point. So let's go to I guess Zay Flowers at 5,900, and then whoever projects the best will plug them into the flex.
I will say, building this out, and I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, just going back to your point about Russell Wilson being contrarian, I'm a tad worried that a lot of the Russell Wilson lineups are going to look the same.
Potentially. I mean, there's something else we could do too, where we could could leave salary on the table. The other thing you could do is not play Derrick Henry. You could go with Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews or something like that.
Right.
Well, let's see. Who projects best at 4,500, Mike? Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Wait, no. He's at 3.7 for what we have
Sort
left.
by projection. Sort by projection.
Oh, that's why I'm wrong. There we go.
It's going to be like Schultz.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Plug and Dalton.
Schultz are likely. Yeah.
Schultz.
All right.
All right. Let's run this. It is leaving a decent amount of salary on the table. Ended up being positive. It's going to be harder on some of these 2-game slates to have massive power because there's only so many options. But all right, ended up looking good. Let's go to FanDuel now. We'll build out a FanDuel lineup and see how the FanDuel side of things looks. So we have already made a Russell Wilson stack on DraftKings. So for FanDuel, let's go chalky. Let's go with a Lamar Jackson lineup. How about that? We'll go Lamar Jackson, and then this one won't have Derrick Henry. So it'll be a different makeup of the lineup. And then we'll go to, let's see, who do you want as the pass catchers? We probably only need one with Lamar Jackson, but we could go Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, I was going to say Bateman because, maybe the ownership discount we might get, but then I like Flowers and Bateman just because. Yeah, Lamar can get there just with his legs, but he can also get there with his arm, as we've seen.
All right, Mike, put in Flowers and Bateman. Okay, Flowers and Bateman. And then at running back, so if we're not going to play Derrick Henry, makes a whole lot of sense to go to Joe Mixon then. So plug in Mixon.
You know what's going to be a really contrarian build? I'm just thinking about this on both sites is builds without Mixon or Henry.
Yeah. Let's do, after we finish this lineup, we'll build the DraftKings lineup. Doesn't have either of them.
Sweet.
All right. So Lamar, Mixon, Pacheco at 6K.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. We'll go Pacheco. Defense. I guess plug the Ravens defense into this one too. Do an onslaught stack. So Matt, we've got a wide receiver, tight end, and a flex spot left. Who do you want to plug into that final wide receiver spot?
In the final wide receiver spot, should we run it back with Austin?
We've got that's going to leave a lot of salary on the table.
Worthy.
What do we have for salary there, Mike?
Basically 6,400 each.
430.
But with a tight end, which should bump the rest.
Yeah.
So I would plug Kelsey in at tight end.
Okay. So let's work backwards. Put Kelsey in at tight end. Okay.
I mean, this is where you could go Najee Harris and Worthy.
Sure. Let's plug that in. Worthy, Harris. That last flex spot on a 2-game slate is really whoever salary fits.
Yes.
It was Worthy, right?
Yeah. You could type their name in too, Mike, if that's easy.
Yeah, I know. I just was brain dead.
Well, we knew that. I don't even know if the audience could hear him or not.
I always wonder that.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Worthy.
Yeah, am I crazy?
I can't see on the screen, so it's.
Who's gonna try?
It's really blurry over Zoom. It's hard for me to see.
It's so blurry.
It was blocked out somehow.
Okay.
What was the last one I'm missing? Now I have Worthy in.
Kelsey
it was
at
Bateman.
tight end. Oh no, so
I have
Kelsey at tight end already got him. So Bateman and Flowers.
That's why there wasn't enough salary. That's why I couldn't find it. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Bateman is 6,300. It's not letting me.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense. I didn't realize they were over the salary cap limit.
Here we go.
Didn't realize that.
Apologies. 5 minutes to lock, everybody. 5 minutes to lock.
So wait, were we not over the cap for that lineup? Like, what did we change? Okay. I got you.
All right. So yeah, that lineup ended up not coming out looking good, Matt. Negative 20% sim ROI.
Yeah, the first thing that I look at that maybe should change is either Harris or the Ravens D. I don't like playing Harris with the Ravens D because you kind of need touchdowns from Harris.
All right. So let's so that lineup ended up not looking good. Let's really quickly go back to DraftKings, Mike, and let's try to build a lineup with neither of the pay up running backs. I have a feeling this is going to be difficult to get a positive sim ROI for this. 2-game slates, always a little bit trickier to get those high upside lineups. Let's go. I guess if we're not going to either of the pay up running backs, we kind of have to go Lamar Jackson, right?
Yes.
So Lamar, and then where are we going to go?
This is where I kind of like your idea of potentially playing both Pittsburgh running backs.
Let's do it. Let's go Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren.
And I think you immediately go Collins and Flowers just because you have the salary.
And yeah, probably Bateman too, just to get. Oh no, we could always go Andrews at tight end.
Sure.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go. Mike, plug in Flowers, Collins, and Calvin Austin. Okay, and then go Andrews at tight end.
And that's 44, but there's still a defense, of course.
Yeah. We could always upgrade Austin if we need to as well. Okay. So defense, just plug in the Chiefs at 2,700.
And then 6,100. We can go Pacheco, go Kelsey, double tight end.
Let's, who projects better if you sort by projections?
I learned how to do this today live. That would be Kelsey. Look at me.
So let's go Kelsey. And does that give us any leftover salary?
Yeah, it gives us $500. I'm gonna run it.
Okay. I was gonna say that maybe.
Oh, sorry. Only because we only have a minute left. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
All right, that one ended up coming out good with neither of the pay up running backs. How about that? Our best lineup that simmed out, Matt. It's an ugly looking lineup. You're unmuted, by the way.
Yeah, my bad. I don't know what to make of it, but it's really interesting.
So a big part of some of these 2-game slates happens on Showdown too, where oftentimes just being unique is going to set lineups apart. And just the fact that some of these lineup constructions are lineups that people would just be like, I don't want to play Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren together. What will end up happening oftentimes in the Sims is when we're building out the field, if there's very few lineups with certain combinations of players, especially on small slates, those lower owned combinations will end up simming better just because of how infrequently they're used by the field. And often ownership does matter more for 1- and 2-game slates than the actual players and who is combined in terms of correlation. That's
a great point, because a lot of times if you do, on a Showdown slate, if you run the Sims like earlier in the morning or run the single lineup simulator, it changes dramatically later in the day when ownership is updated and the projections have barely moved.
And that is going to bring us to lock. Any final thoughts here, Matt, before we sign off?
No, man, that's all I got. Love doing shows with you. And I had a great one.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, a couple of deals going on this site. If you want to get more than 50% off our NFL Sims Max package, promo code CELEBRATE. That is only going to be running until next week. Same with the promo code for Portfolio EV, promo code GIFT-EV. Get 50% off our Portfolio EV tools, a must-have for the holidays, really anytime. If you guys are somebody who's betting. Thank you all very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. NBA Live before lock tonight, that's going to be Matt Belman and Emax, so go check those guys out. And then, of course, tomorrow morning, we got the big NFL show for the main stage, so check that out. Guys, enjoy your weekend. Good luck with the rest of your day. See you tomorrow.